Hello, I'm James Bacon and I'm going to present my work in the area of powder incorporation using an inline rotostator. For further information regarding my research, you can contact myself or my supervisors on the email addresses shown. The manufacture of nanoparticulate dispersions requires the incorporation of the dry powder into a liquid, using either a stirred tank or an inline device. As part of my PhD study, I have investigated powder incorporation using the Witron ZC1. Previous work on powder incorporation using a stirred tank found that using different geometries resulted in different incorporation mechanics. Hence, the incorporation process is dependent on both the material properties of the solid-liquid pair and the hydrodynamic conditions within the mixing equipment. The Witron ZC1 that I've studied for my PhD is a pilot-scale device, capable of handling powder flows of up to 33 kilograms per minute and liquid flow rates of up to 180 litres per minute. Liquid enters the ZC1 through the horizontal inlet and is accelerated through the rotostator head. This creates a negative pressure above and draws powder down into the body of the rotostator. This is safer than additions at the liquid surface, which can cause powder raising. For my studies, 2 rotostators were used, which differ in the gap width between the teeth on the outside edge of the rotostator. Aerosol 200V in water was used as the test dispersion in concentrations of up to 13% by weight. Rotor speed was fixed at 6,380 RPM, which is the speed that the Witron ZC1 is available at off the shelf. Liquid flow rate was varied between 1 and 3 litres per second, and the incorporation studies were supplemented with measurements of air suction velocity at the powder inlet, made both in the continuous phase and during the course of incorporation investigations. Powder incorporation was found to be constant until a solids concentration of 11% by weight was reached. It was found that this corresponded to a change in the dispersion rheology, as it began to show Herschel-Bulkley type behaviour. Similar trends were found with the 1.5mm head, up to concentrations of 10% by weight. It was also found that air suction velocities measured during the course of incorporation investigations were constant up to 10% by weight, and air suction velocity was inversely proportional to incorporation time. Although not all of our work has been shown in this presentation, the following conclusions were drawn from this section of my project. With both heads, when additions are made into the region of high shear, high fluid velocities, and high turbulence within the rotostator head, constant incorporation rates can be achieved until the dispersion reaches a concentration where challenging rheology is found. Measurements of air suction velocity at the powder inlet are indicative of incorporation time, and so industrially, time, waste, and powder usage can be reduced in the process development stage by using measurements of air suction velocity alongside incorporation trials at select conditions. Measurements of air suction allowed us to identify optimum incorporation conditions for both heads and showed that incorporation is faster with a wider gap width head. Thank you very much for listening. My supervisors and I are contactable on the email addresses shown, and a more in-depth recording is available on request.
Hello, my name is David Elliott from AkzoNobel Decorative Paints. My poster is entitled The Importance of Particle Dispersions in Paint Formulations and the Need for Better Characterization Methods. Here for reference is my abstract to read later. I'll carry on with my presentation. Water-based paints with polymer latex binders are complex mixtures of different dispersed particles, which range widely in their size and shape. The particles are generally stabilized thermodynamically by anionic charges and steric interactions of bound polymer chains, and kinetically by the viscosity or the viscoelasticity of the continuous medium. Each of these particle dispersions has their own individual function in the product, and it is important that they're all kept stable. Since there are many potential interactions between the particles, this is a difficult task for the paint formulator with many challenges. And making paint colours accurately and robustly is one such challenge. Paint colours are generally made by mixing together white base paints with concentrated dispersions of coloured pigments called tinters. This can be done either on a large scale in the factory or on a small scale in a paint store. In addition to the tinter and the paint forming stable particle dispersions themselves, another requirement for an accurate mixed colour is that the coloured pigment particles and the particles in the paint form stable dispersions when the two components are mixed together. In the lab, this is tested using a finger rub-out test on the partially dried paint. The colour of the rub-out region can generally differ from the surrounding undisturbed regions in 2 directions. It can become more intense in colour, and this indicates that there's some flocculation the colored pigment, or the rubbed out region can be whiter, less intense in color than the surrounding area, indicating that there's some flocculation of the white pigment in the mixed paint. Several features of particle dispersions in paints make them difficult to characterize, but the high concentration is a particular challenge. Most available techniques involve high dilution factors, leading to doubts on whether the size distributions and quantities like zeta potential are representative of the real material. In my example, I show zeta potentials for a yellow pigment measured versus surfactant concentration. In the first case, using an electrophoretic light scattering instrument at 0.03 weight% concentration, and in the second case with an electroacoustic instrument at 5 weight% concentration. The agreement is quite good considering the differences in the techniques employed, but different conclusions could be drawn on the preferred surfactant and its required concentration from the two sets of data. And even with the electroacoustic measurement, concentration of 5% is some way off the in-service concentration, typically of 50 to 60%.
Thank you for the opportunity to share how particle incorporation in liquid is applied in PNG and some of the challenges we face. I'm Kevin Kwan, working in the Corporate Engineering Research Lab in Westchester, Ohio. Most of our formulated products involve particle incorporation in liquids. The way of incorporation differs. How the material can be added manually or automatically. The process can be in a batch mode or continuously. The level of particle in a formulation varies significantly. For example, it can be over 50% in a dry laundry formulation, but less than 1% in our liquid detergents. In addition to dispersion, polymeric particles like CMC, zensim gum, added for rheology modifying, will go through additional transmissions such as hydration dissolution. Today, our process development is conducted empirically. We still have significant challenge to scale lab and pilot plant learnings to production. In the near term, we're interested in method developments, in particular inline measurements that can help with the multi-phase particle size distribution determination. We are also interested in models for process optimization and scalability. In the longer run, we'd like to be able to design and scale particle incorporation virtually. For example, in the future, the choice of mixer may be based on force requirements to disperse particles. And the kinetics, the extent of dispersion should be able to model when considering process scalability. I'd like to finish my post with an example to show how the measurements and the model can help to solve a real industrial problem. In dentifrice, silica is incorporated as abrasive active. Silica can also act as a product rheology modifier. We do not have a standard making platform in all our plants. Some use a batch process to add silica, others using an inline high shear mixer. As the silica slurry goes through mixing, some attrition to silica particulate particles occurs. In turn, it changes the effective volume friction of particles in the slurry. Between plants, we may have inconsistent shear history to silica. This can be a source that creates inconsistent finished product rheology. We can improve our process control if silica particle size distribution can be measured in line, or silica degradation through a shear history can be accurately modeled. Again, thank you for the opportunity to share P&G's perspective in particle incorporation. Because of time difference, I will miss some of the early part of the program. I look forward to join you and making connection with you.
Hi, I'm Anna Stobo, and I'm a Senior Research Scientist at CPI. I'm here to talk to you about a post titled A Statistical Approach to Ink Formulation. This was carried out as part of a Horizon 2020 project called LEBED, which aims to enable the use of hybrid electronics in a series of applications by developing novel materials and processes. The purpose of this work was to optimize a copper inkjet ink for printability and stability by varying the solvent ratios. So we started off with a base copper inkjet ink formulation, which was approached showing poor stability and wetting. We selected 12 candle solvents based on their boiling points and their low safety category. However, this is quite a large number of solvents to look at in any sort of great detail. So we reduced the number of solvents by discounting similar solvents using principal component analysis, which is a statistical method used to compare the parameters of solvents. So we looked at how chemically and physically similar they were and just selected 5 from that initial 12. From there, we developed a design of experiments. The idea was to explore the formulation space, so to understand the impact of each of those solvents individually and mixed with one another, so the 1-to-1, 1-to-1-to-1 ratio, etc. Following on from that, we carried out the experimentation using ChemSpeed 4max high throughput robot by dispensing components, mixing using high shear mix. The advantage of using high throughput robotics is that you get reliable dispensing each time. You can make a large number of formulations in an automated manner without taking up technician or scientist time. So these components were dispensed, mixed using high shear, and the resulting inks were characterized. Again, much of this characterization was carried out in an automated manner. So the 3 automated methods were rheology, light transmission, and TGA. The rheology was used to determine that the viscosity of the ink would be within the right range for inkjet printing, which is usually up to 14 millipascal seconds. The light transmission was used to measure the dropout of particles, so the sedimentation of those particles over time. As the particles drop out, the tops of the vials become more transparent. And TGA was used to measure respective drying times. We also looked at microscopy to carry out imaging of the wetting of the droplets. So the outcome of this DOE was that a formulation was recommended based on our required outputs. So we put in a target range for viscosity. We aim to maximize stability, maximize drying times to prevent ink drying on the inkjet cartridge, and maximizing wetting onto a substrate. The final formulation was produced in replicate, and this confirmed statistical findings. And this resultant formulation did achieve the set requirements. So really, this process demonstrates how you can use statistical methods and high throughput experimentation for this discovery phase of ink formulation. And this will give you a more targeted approach to reoptimization. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Right, okay. We have a number of questions in the chat. So I guess if we start with James. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Simon.
Do you want to address some, I know you've answered some things, I think, already in the chat, just to bring out some of the key points from those questions?
Certainly. So Claudio asked whether there would be an increase in power consumption as the dispersion reached the higher concentrations that I studied. And my answer to that is that direct power consumption was not measured during my study, but as part of it, I developed an expression for the power of the device using glycerol water mixtures. And so I would expect, as the apparent viscosity of the dispersion increased, I'd expect a corresponding increase in the power consumption. So yes, I'd expect the power consumption to increase as the solid concentration reached the higher value studied.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, carry on. Sorry, I mean, if you've got
No, it's the second question that Charles asked was whether there was just trying to scroll back up on the chat, whether the co-incorporation of air occurs as well as particulates, and whether that requires a degassing stage or effect rheology. So for my study, powder is preloaded into a powder funnel above the rotor-stator head. So the co-incorporation of air, and it was entered into the rotor-stator head through the opening of a valve on the powder tube. So the co-incorporation of air depends on the solids loading within that funnel and sort of how quickly the operator can close off that valve after incorporation has occurred. I didn't investigate degassing or whether the air entrained, or whether there was any air entrained in the system and what effect this had on rheology, because steps were taken to avoid air entrainment through the incorporation process.
Great. Okay, thank you, James. If we move on. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Simon.
Hi. There's been a number of questions in the chat around basically, I guess, particle sizing and how important nanoparticles are, and online particle sizing. Do you want to sort of summarize your responses to Fernando? Frando, sorry.
Yes, so Frando asked whether DLS, dynamic light scattering, was used, and yes, it is, but generally on individual components. So I think for particle sizing and zeta potential measurements, we would generally simplify the system and look at individual components. And so the difficulty there is the high dilution required, which reduces the confidence that you're measuring the real material, and also it's inconvenient if you want a more rapid QC tool. And inline or at-line techniques would be potentially very valuable, but yeah, it would have to be demonstrated that they do tell us something useful about end-use properties and with sufficient precision.
Okay, thank you, David. I guess there's one silly question from my point of view was, in a way, it always seems to me that measuring color opacity, reflectivity is a very direct measurement of particle size, distribution, orientation, and so on. Mm-hmm. How far is it possible to back out these sort of properties from your final end performance measurements?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Yeah. To my knowledge, that isn't done at the moment. But okay. Yeah, a lot of information is buried in there. Like you say, it's quite an exercise in physics and color physics to extract it.
Yeah, and I guess it's an ill-constrained problem. Really, there are multiple solutions, so it's yeah, rather hope over experience. Okay, thank you very much, David. Keeming, I don't think you're here because it's 5 a.m. for you, or well, yeah, about 5 a.m., isn't it? So a bit cruel. So I don't think Keeming's here. I think his presentation was interesting because the range of products he was talking about is one of the challenges, and I think how much we can transfer from, even within one company, between the learning on particle dispersion within one product to another, and how you control that and how it's determined is a challenge in itself. So within one company, let alone cross companies, we're trying to do here. So thank you very much. Anna-Marie, good morning again.
Hi, good morning, Simon.
Great, you managed to get through. Do you want to summarize some of the comments that you've had just in the questions in the chat?
Yes, no problem. So there was one from yourself, wasn't there, Simon, about transmission telling about sedimentation, and is the strength of that sediment important? Did you mean the concentration by that?
I mean the strength rather. I mean as in how, because if my particles stick together when they, I could imagine in an ink, if I make a sticky agglomerate, it's a problem. Whereas if I make a loose agglomerate, it might well break up again and actually be perfectly all right.
Yes, I see what you mean. I guess the assumption is with the high shear mixing that we're breaking up the agglomerates.
Yeah, okay.
In hindsight, we should have looked further into the whether we were breaking up all the agglomerates. So I guess, but I guess that would be accounted for in the values. So if something is sedimenting quicker, then this could be due to agglomeration, or it could be due to solvent incompatibilities. So though I guess we didn't look into that in too much detail, we still got the same outcome.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's just a thought. I mean, once again,
yeah, of course.
It's a difficult one to know whether these are important or not. You can always think of other things, but yeah.
Yeah. The next question was about whether we went back. So we did PCA to select a certain number of solvents. It was asked whether we'd gone back to look at all of the solvents to see if that PCA had been representative. And we did. We did go back, and the sort of quarter of the graph that was shown to be successful in the experiment that we did, all of the other solvents within that quarter were also shown to be the best. So it did do a good job of picking out a useful smaller number of solvents. And I think that was all the questions for me, unless I've missed any.
Yep, I think that was it for time. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. That's great. Rather than, as there aren't any more questions at the moment, I don't think we haven't answered. What I'd suggest is we just take a couple of minutes break. We're, according to my clock, about 3 minutes ahead of time, literally. So we'll set up for the next session. If you want to go and grab a quick cup of coffee, stretch your legs or whatever else, now would be a good time. And we'll start literally in probably 2.5 minutes time now. Great, thank you for sharing. Those were really interesting set of posters. Precisely what I hoped we'd get in this session is a really good broad breadth for some of the challenges of incorporating particles, how we're measuring them, how we're actually doing them in industrial circumstances, whether sometimes those industrial circumstances are in research labs and universities, but very helpful, thank you.